Margaret Chen's hands trembled as she held the photograph, the paper crackling between her fingers like autumn leaves. The image showed her grandmother's 1952 wedding reception, captured in black and white by a professional photographer in San Francisco's Chinatown. 53 guests smiled at the camera, frozen in celebration. But there, standing behind the bride's left shoulder, was a woman who should not exist. A woman Margaret recognized immediately, despite the impossibility. The woman was herself, Margaret Chen, exactly as she appeared today, wearing the same burgundy dress she had put on that very morning in 2019. The photograph had arrived in a manila envelope with no return address, postmarked 3 days earlier from a post office that had been demolished in 1987. Inside, a handwritten note in faded ink read simply, "She's been waiting for you to find this. Room 237, Fairmont Hotel, tonight at midnight." The handwriting was Margaret's own, though she had no memory of writing those words. The ink appeared to be fountain pen, written on paper that crumbled slightly at the edges as if aged by decades beyond its actual years. Dr. James Morrison, a forensic document examiner with 30 years of experience analyzing question documents for the FBI, had never encountered anything like it. Under his magnifying glass, the photograph showed no signs of digital manipulation, no evidence of double exposure or composite imaging. The silver halide crystals were consistent with 1950s photographic paper, the chemical composition authentic to the era. Even more disturbing, the woman's image appeared to have been captured by the same camera as the rest of the wedding party, with identical lighting, grain structure, and depth of field. Every technical analysis confirmed what seemed impossible. The photograph was genuine. Margaret's investigation into her family history had begun innocently enough. After inheriting her grandmother's Victorian house following the funeral 3 months earlier, she had discovered boxes of old photographs, letters, and documents in the dusty attic. Her grandmother, Li Wei, had rarely spoken about her past, deflecting questions with vague mentions of difficult times and things better left buried. The wedding photograph had been tucked inside a Chinese lacquered box, wrapped in silk that crumbled at Margaret's touch, releasing the faint scent of jasmine and something else, something metallic and cold. The Fairmont Hotel's records showed that room 237 had been occupied on the night Margaret received the photograph, but the registration showed her own name and signature in handwriting she didn't recognize as her own. Security footage from the lobby captured her entering the hotel at 11:47 p.m., walking purposefully toward the elevators as if she belonged there. Margaret watched herself on the grainy video, noting the burgundy dress, the determined expression, the confident stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going. She had no memory of ever being at the hotel that night. She had been home, grading papers from her physics classes at UC Berkeley, with her cat Schrödinger as her only witness. The hotel manager, Robert Finch, had worked at the Fairmont for 15 years and prided himself on rational explanations for unusual occurrences. Guest complaints about noisy neighbors were usually traced to old pipes. Strange smells came from the kitchen vents. Electrical problems explained flickering lights. But room 237 had always been different. Guests reported strange dreams filled with people they didn't recognize, the sensation of being watched by invisible eyes, and an overwhelming compulsion to search for something they couldn't identify. The housekeeping staff whispered about personal belongings that appeared and disappeared overnight, about the room's temperature dropping to near freezing without explanation, about mirrors that showed reflections a split second behind reality. Margaret's research into the room's history revealed a disturbing pattern spanning 7 decades. Every 13 years, someone would check into room 237 under circumstances they couldn't explain, seeking answers to questions they didn't remember asking. The registration records showed an unsettling consistency. Each guest had the same signature, the same precise handwriting, despite being completely different people from different eras living different lives. The most recent entry before Margaret's mysterious visit belonged to a woman named Sarah Martinez in 2006, who had disappeared from the room without checking out, leaving behind only a photograph of herself at a 1993 family reunion she had never attended and clothes that smelled of jasmine and metal. Professor Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist at Stanford who specialized in temporal mechanics and the theoretical possibilities of causality violations, examined Margaret's case with scientific fascination mixed with growing unease. The photograph represented what she termed a causal paradox, an event that appeared to violate the fundamental principle that effects must follow causes. In quantum mechanics, such paradoxes were theoretical curiosities, mathematical possibilities that existed only in equations describing impossible worlds. But here was physical evidence that someone had somehow documented an event that included their own future self, captured with technology that couldn't fake such an intricate deception. The deeper Margaret delved into her grandmother's past, the more unsettling the story became. Li Wei had arrived in San Francisco in 1949, claiming to be a refugee from the Chinese Civil War's devastating aftermath. But immigration records showed inconsistencies in her story, gaps in documentation that suggested a far more complex and deliberately obscured truth. Among her grandmother's papers, Margaret found letters written in classical Mandarin, which when translated by a Berkeley linguistics professor revealed references to the woman who walks between times and the photograph that shows what will be, and most chilling of all, the price that must be paid by daughters of daughters, Dr. Morrison's continued analysis of the photograph revealed additional anomalies that challenged every conventional understanding of photographic evidence. The woman in the background, undeniably Margaret, cast no shadow despite the strong overhead lighting that created clear, sharp shadows for everyone else in the image. Her reflection appeared in the ornate mirror behind the wedding party, but the reflection showed her facing the opposite direction from her actual pose in the photograph, as if the mirror existed in a slightly different moment in time. Most disturbing of all, when the photograph was scanned at the highest possible resolution and examined pixel by pixel, Margaret's image showed a slightly different timestamp embedded in the metadata. A timestamp from 2019, somehow embedded in a photograph taken in 1952. Margaret's dreams began 3 days after discovering the photograph. Every night, she found herself standing in room 237, watching her grandmother's wedding reception through a window that opened not onto the San Francisco street 10 floors below, but directly onto the banquet hall where the celebration had taken place 67 years earlier. In the dreams, she could hear the conversations in Cantonese and broken English, smell the traditional Chinese dishes mingling with American wedding cake, feel the joy and hope of the newlyweds radiating like warmth from a fire. And always, she was aware of being watched by someone behind her, someone who felt familiar yet remained just outside her peripheral vision, breathing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The investigation led Margaret to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a parapsychologist at the University of California, who had spent 3 decades documenting cases of temporal displacement and photographic anomalies. Dr. Tanaka's extensive files contained 17 similar cases dating back to 1923, each involving photographs that showed people in times and places where they logically shouldn't exist. The common thread was always a family connection, often involving first-generation immigrants who had left their homeland under mysterious circumstances that official records couldn't fully explain. Margaret's grandmother's complete immigration file, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request that took weeks to process, revealed that Li Wei had originally attempted to enter the United States in 1947, 2 full years before her successful immigration. The first attempt had been denied for reasons that remained classified even 70 years later. A handwritten note in the margin, barely legible in faded blue ink, mentioned temporal inconsistencies in testimony and Subject claims knowledge of future events with disturbing accuracy. The immigration officer who had written the note, Thomas Bradley, had died in a single-car accident 3 days after Li Wei's successful entry into the country. His vehicle found wrapped around a tree on a straight stretch of road under perfect driving conditions. On the night of November 15, 2019, exactly 1 month after receiving the photograph, Margaret found herself standing outside the Fairmont Hotel at 11:30 p.m. with no memory of leaving her apartment. She had no recollection of the 20-minute drive across the city, no memory of parking her car or walking through the lobby. The valet took her keys with professional courtesy, as if her arrival was not only expected but anticipated. In her purse, she discovered a room key for 237, though she had no memory of checking in or speaking to anyone at the front desk. The room was exactly as she had seen it in her dreams, down to the specific pattern of wear on the carpet and the way shadows fell across the burgundy wallpaper. A window that should have faced the street instead showed the interior of a banquet hall where her grandmother's wedding reception played out in an endless loop. The same guests laughed and danced, raised the same toasts and shared the same meals, completely unaware they were being observed across the impossible gulf of decades. Margaret watched her grandmother, young and radiant in her silk wedding dress, accepting congratulations and gifts from family members Margaret had never met but somehow recognized. As midnight approached, Margaret understood with sudden, terrible clarity what she had to do. She positioned herself behind the bride's left shoulder, matching exactly the pose she had seen in the impossible photograph. A camera flash illuminated the room with blinding white light, though no photographer was visible anywhere in the space. In that moment of illumination, she felt herself existing in 2 times simultaneously, standing in room 237 in 2019 while also standing in the banquet hall in 1952. Her consciousness stretched across 67 years like a bridge spanning an infinite chasm. The revelation came with the certainty of lived experience rather than logical deduction. Her grandmother had not been a refugee from political upheaval or economic hardship. Li Wei had been fleeing something far more personal and infinitely more terrifying than any war. She had been running from her own granddaughter, from a cycle of temporal displacement that had trapped the women of their family for generations beyond counting. The photograph was not evidence of time travel or supernatural intervention. It was evidence of a prison constructed from love and sacrifice and the terrible weight of inherited destiny. Each generation, one woman would become unstuck in time, forced to witness and participate in family events across multiple decades, watching their loved ones live and die while remaining trapped in an endless cycle of observation and intervention. The immigration officer's classified notes made perfect sense now. Li Wei had known too much about America's future because she had already lived it, had already watched it unfold through windows that opened onto times that hadn't happened yet. The mysterious deaths, the classified denials, the careful reconstruction of identity were all part of a desperate attempt to break free from a pattern that had claimed the women of their bloodline for centuries. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The cycle doesn't end with understanding. It ends with choice. Check your attic tomorrow morning. The message was timestamped from 1952, sent from a number that wouldn't exist for decades. When she looked up from her phone, the window no longer showed her grandmother's wedding reception, but her own apartment building, where she could see herself as a 7-year-old child playing in the courtyard with her grandmother, both of them casting shadows that fell in directions that defied the position of the sun. The next morning, Margaret found a new lacquered box in her grandmother's attic, one that hadn't been there during her previous exhaustive searches. Inside was her own driver's license, dated 2067, showing her face aged by nearly 50 years, but with eyes that held the same expression of quiet determination. Beneath it was a photograph of her future granddaughter's wedding, where Margaret herself stood behind the bride's shoulder, wearing the same burgundy dress, apparently trapped in the same cycle that had claimed every generation before her. But this time, something was different. The photograph from 2067 showed a second figure standing beside Margaret, her grandmother, Li Wei, both of them watching over the wedding with expressions that spoke of resolution rather than resignation, of victory rather than eternal captivity. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting she now recognized as her own future script, was written, "We found the way out. The answer was never to escape the cycle, but to complete it together. Room 237, tonight at midnight. Bring the dress. Trust the love that transcends time." Margaret Chen stands now at the threshold of room 237, holding both photographs, the one that started her journey into impossible territory and the one that promises to end it. The burgundy dress hangs ready in her closet, and the clock shows 11:58 p.m. Whatever happens next will either free her family from their temporal prison or bind her more tightly to its endless repetition. The woman in the photograph that shouldn't exist is about to discover whether some mysteries are meant to be solved or simply accepted as the price of love that transcends the boundaries of time itself, connecting generations across the impossible distances between what was, what is, and what must inevitably come to pass.